Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In a future where the whir of machines was the only constant sound in the lives of many, the world was reshaped by progress that outpaced its people. Towering factories hummed with precision, manned no longer by hands of flesh and blood, but by circuits and cold steel. The humans who once filled these spaces had been driven out, one by one, as machines proved faster, smarter, and cheaper. The working class had become ghosts in a world they helped build, their voices dwindling to a low hum like the machines that now took their place. Eli Freeman stood at the heart of this dying class. He was a man of integrity, raised in a community that had relied on its hands, its muscles, its spirit. But now, as a politician fighting for a vanishing way of life, he often wondered if it was already too late. His campaign had drawn crowds of thousands of workers who had been displaced, left behind by progress. They had rallied around his promises of change, of reclaiming their roles in society. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The night of the election, Eli watched the results roll in from a small, dimly lit room in the back of his campaign headquarters. Outside, the city buzzed with life, the neon lights reflecting off the towering glass buildings, casting an artificial glow over everything. The world had moved on, he thought. Progress had won, and people like him were relics of an old world. His opponent, Victor Huxley, had triumphed. Victor's message of full automation, of a future where machines handled every task with precision, had struck a chord with the majority. It promised efficiency, economic growth, and a lifestyle free from the burdens of manual labor. To those with wealth and power, it was the future they had been waiting for. Eli leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of defeat sink in. His campaign manager, Sarah, sat beside him, her face drawn with exhaustion. "We fought hard," she said softly. "But people don't want to fight the tide of change, Eli. They want to ride it." Eli nodded, though the bitterness of defeat was sharp on his tongue. "I just can't believe they'd sacrifice their own people for convenience." Sarah sighed, glancing at the television screen one last time before switching it off. "It's not about convenience for most of them. It's about survival. They see a future where machines do the hard work, and they think it's progress. They don't see what it's costing us." Eli stood, running a hand through his graying hair. He wasn't old, but the years had weighed heavily on him, each one a reminder of the battles he had fought and lost. The last shred of hope he had clung to during the campaign slipped through his fingers. Outside, the streets were alive with the celebration of Huxley's victory. But Eli couldn't hear the cheers, not over the growing silence that had begun to take hold in his mind. It was a silence that stretched across the country, a silence that had crept into factories, schools, and homes. It was the silence of a working class that had been replaced, their contributions deemed obsolete by the march of technology. But as he stood there in the quiet of his office, something flickered inside him. Defeat, yes, but not surrender. Eli Freeman had never been one to give up. "Maybe they don't see what's happening yet," he said, turning to Sarah. "But they will, and when they do, we need to be ready." The weeks after the election felt like a slow bleed. Factories that had once employed thousands were shuttered, their doors locked, and the workers left to fend for themselves. Automated systems took over entire industries, and soon, it became clear that no sector was immune. Public services, maintenance, even transportation were now the domain of machines. Eli watched as the people he had fought for were pushed further into the margins. He had lost the election, but he hadn't lost his resolve. There had to be another way for workers to reclaim their place without turning back the clock on progress. It was during one of his frequent late-night meetings with the remnants of the workers' unions that Eli first heard the name Nina Patel. A brilliant engineer, she had worked for one of the top tech firms responsible for much of the automation now sweeping the nation. But Nina wasn't just any engineer, she was a visionary, someone who saw the potential in merging human ingenuity with machine efficiency. Eli listened as one of his contacts described her work, and something in her approach resonated with him. "She's developed something that could change everything," his contact said, "but it's still in the experimental phase." The higher-ups didn't want to invest in it. They're too focused on complete automation. But Nina, she sees things differently. Eli's curiosity piqued, and soon he arranged to meet her. They met in a small cafe copyright on the outskirts of the city, a quiet place where the hum of machines couldn't drown out their conversation. Nina was younger than he expected, sharp-eyed and intense. She spoke quickly, her words brimming with ideas, solutions, possibilities. "The problem with full automation," she said, "is that it assumes machines can replace everything humans bring to the table. But that's not true. Machines are good at precision, speed, efficiency, but they can't innovate. They can't adapt in the same way humans can." Eli leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop fighting the machines and start working with them," Nina replied. "I've been developing neural interface technology that allows humans to integrate with AI systems. It's not about making workers obsolete, it's about enhancing what they can do." Nina explained her vision, a world where humans and machines worked in harmony, each complementing the other's strengths. Through advanced neural implants, workers could collaborate with AI systems, offering the creativity and problem-solving abilities that machines lacked. In return, machines would handle the repetitive, precision tasks that humans often struggled with. "It's called symbiosis," she said. "A true partnership between humans and technology." Eli sat back, considering the implications. If what she was proposing could be realized, it could change everything. Workers wouldn't need to fear automation, they could thrive within it, using their natural abilities in ways machines couldn't replicate. "Why haven't we heard about this before?" Eli asked. Nina's expression darkened. "Because it threatens the status quo. The big tech companies and the government are too invested in full automation. They don't want anything that suggests humans still have a role to play." Eli nodded slowly. He could see it now. The challenge wouldn't just be developing the technology. It would be fighting against a system that had already written off the working class as irrelevant. "Let's do it," Eli said. "Let's make symbiosis a reality." The Symbiosis project began in secret, housed in an old factory on the outskirts of the city. With Nina's expertise and Eli's connections, they gathered a small team of engineers, scientists, and labor leaders who believed in their cause. It wasn't long before the first prototypes were ready, neural implants that allowed workers to connect directly with the machines they once feared. The early results were promising. Workers who had been displaced by automation were now able to operate at a level they never thought possible. Tasks that once took hours were completed in minutes, with a precision that matched the best machines. But more importantly, the workers themselves felt a sense of purpose again. They weren't just cogs in a machine, they were the driving force behind it. Word of the project began to spread quietly through the underground networks of labor unions and displaced workers. As more people saw the potential of symbiosis, the movement grew. But it also attracted attention from those who wanted to see it fail. Victor Huxley, now a prominent figure in the government, caught wind of the project. He saw it as a direct threat to the fully automated future he had championed, and he wasn't about to let it gain any more traction. "We need to shut this down," he told his advisors. "If people start thinking they can coexist with machines, it undermines everything we've worked for." The crackdown began swiftly. Government agents raided Symbiosis facilities, seizing equipment and arresting key figures in the movement. Eli and Nina went into hiding, moving from safe house to safe house as they tried to keep the project alive. But as the pressure mounted, it became clear that they couldn't continue operating in the shadows forever. Eli knew they were running out of time. If they didn't find a way to bring symbiosis to the public, the government would crush them before they ever had a chance. Eli sat in a dimly lit room, his thoughts racing as the sounds of the world outside filtered through the cracked windows. It had been days since they went underground, hiding from Victor's agents. The crackdown had been swift and brutal, hitting Symbiosis harder than Eli had expected. But what Victor didn't know is that they weren't finished. Not yet. Nina paced across the small room, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed a series of schematics on a handheld display. The neural implants had worked better than they'd ever hoped, but now, with their resources cut off, they were on the verge of losing everything. "We can't stay here forever, Eli," she said without looking up. "The longer we wait, the more people they're going to arrest. We have to make a move." Eli rubbed his chin, feeling the weight of her words. She was right, of course. They couldn't hide in the shadows while their people were being rounded up and their work dismantled. But if they acted too soon, they risked everything. The symbiosis movement had gained momentum underground, but to take it public would mean facing the full force of the government. "What about the network?" Eli asked. "We've got enough people on our side now. We could spread the word, get the workers to rally. If we make a big enough push, maybe we can turn the tide." Nina stopped pacing and looked at him, her expression hard to read. "Rally them for what? A revolution? You think they'll just let us walk out of here and convince the masses that symbiosis is the answer?" Victor's got too much power, and the public. They've been fed the lie for too long. They believe automation is their salvation. "We're the enemy, Eli. We're the past." Eli leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Then we change the narrative. We make them see what we've built in not as a threat, but as the future." "They're scared, Nina, scared of losing their way of life, just like we were. But once they see what we've accomplished, they'll understand. They'll realize that symbiosis isn't about fighting machines, it's about reclaiming our place alongside them." Nina's gaze softened slightly, and she nodded, though her skepticism lingered. "I hope you're right. Because if this fails, there's no coming back from it." Eli stood and moved toward the small table where they had spread out their remaining equipment. The neural interface devices lay neatly packed in cases, ready for distribution. They had enough to arm a small army of workers if only they could get them into the right hands. "We'll need a message," Eli said, his voice thoughtful. "Something powerful enough to cut through the fear. We'll broadcast it through the symbiosis network. Let everyone know we're still here, that we're still fighting." Nina smiled, her fingers tapping away at the interface. "A revolution, then. But this time, it'll be silent." As dawn broke the next morning, Eli and Nina began their move. They couldn't risk using traditional communication networks as those were controlled by Victor and his technocratic allies. Instead, they tapped into the symbiosis network, a decentralized system of encrypted signals that had grown alongside the movement. It was their lifeline now, and it was how they would reach the people. Eli stood in front of the camera they had rigged up in the corner of the safe house, the only light in the room coming from a small lamp beside him. He wore the same expression he had on the campaign trail, calm, determined, ready to fight for what he believed in. "To everyone watching this," he began, his voice low and steady, "I know you're scared. I know you've seen what's happening out there. The machines, the government, they're taking everything from us. Our jobs, our livelihoods, our dignity. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to choose between fighting the machines or giving up. There's a third way, a way forward, where humans and technology work together." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "We call it symbiosis. It's a new way of living, a new way of working, one where machines enhance what we can do, but don't replace us, where our creativity, our ingenuity, our humanity, are what drive us forward. This government doesn't want you to know that. They want you to believe that you're obsolete, that you're no longer needed. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie." Nina gave him a nod from behind the camera, signaling him to continue. "We've already begun. Across the city, workers are joining us. We've seen what's possible, and now it's time for all of you to see it too. We're not asking you to fight the machines. We're asking you to embrace the AIMA on our terms. Symbiosis is the future, and together, we can take it back." The transmission ended, and Eli stepped away from the camera, exhaling deeply. It was a gamble, he knew that. But if they could get the message out, if they could reach enough people, then maybe just maybe they had a chance. Nina quickly encrypted the file and sent it through the Symbiosis network, letting it ripple out across the underground. From there, it would spread like wildfire, impossible for the government to control. Now we wait, she said, her fingers hovering over the controls. Let's hope they're ready to listen. They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, reports started coming in from across the city. Workers, once fearful and silent, were beginning to rally. In the factories, they refused to be replaced. In the streets, they demanded their rights. And in homes, families began to speak up, sharing the message that had once been whispered only in secret. Symbiosis was the answer. But the government wasn't blind to what was happening. Victor Huxley, always one step ahead, quickly launched a counter-offensive. Automated police forces, once reserved for crime control, were deployed to break up protests, to arrest workers, to silence dissent. Eli watched the news feeds from their hideout, his jaw clenched in frustration. The crackdown was brutal, swift, and effective. But it wasn't enough to stop the tide that had already begun to turn. We've got momentum, Nina said, her eyes glued to the same feeds. But it's not going to be enough. They're scared, Eli. They know we're right, but fear's a powerful thing. They're still afraid of what's going to happen if they go all in. Eli nodded. We need to give them a reason to believe. We need a symbol, something they can rally around, something that shows them we're not just an idea, we're real. Nina frowned. And what exactly do you have in mind? Eli turned away from the screen, his mind racing. I'm going back to the factories. Nina's eyes widened. Are you insane? They'll arrest you the second you set foot out there. Maybe, Eli said, his voice calm. But if the people see me standing with them, out there in the open, it'll send a message that we're not afraid, that we're not hiding anymore. Nina stared at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. You've got a death wish. You know that? Eli smiled faintly. Maybe, but it's the only way. The next day, Eli stood at the entrance to one of the largest factories in the city, surrounded by hundreds of workers. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes before a storm. The automated police forces were already circling the perimeter, their metal bodies gleaming in the artificial light of the city. Eli raised his hand, signaling for the crowd to quiet down. They looked to him, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. He knew what this moment meant. It wasn't just about the Factoria, it was about everything they had fought for. We've been told we're not needed anymore, Eli said, his voice carrying over the crowd. That the machines can do our jobs better, faster, cheaper. But what they don't tell you is that machines don't care. They don't innovate. They don't build communities, or families, or futures. We do that. And today, we're going to remind them of that. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filling the air with a defiance that had been missing for too long. Eli stood tall, feeling the energy surge through him. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Suddenly, a loudspeaker crackled to life, and the cold, mechanical voice of one of the police drones echoed through the air. This is an unauthorized gathering. Disperse immediately or face arrest. Eli didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. We're not going anywhere, he said, his voice steady. We're staying right here, where we belong. The police drones advanced, their metal feet clanking against the pavement. But Eli didn't move. And neither did the crowd. They stood their ground, a silent wall of resistance against the automated forces that had once controlled their lives. And in that moment, Eli knew they had won.